My brother called a family meeting at his house to announce he was selling our father's estate and cutting me out of the proceeds. He said my 2 years of caregiving didn't constitute a real contribution. I just looked down at my phone and typed a single text message. His attorney had never met mine, and that was about to become his most expensive oversight. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. My father spent 30 years in that workshop behind our childhood home, restoring antique furniture that other people had given up on. He had a gift for finding the original thing beneath layers of paint and neglect. He always said that patience was the only tool that truly mattered. I think about that now, about patience, and I think he was teaching me something he knew I would eventually need. My father's name was Robert. He was 63 years old when the neurologist sat us down and used the word progressive. He was 64 when he stopped being able to drive. He was 65 when he stopped being able to work. I was 27 when his diagnosis came through, finishing up a contract with a mid-sized packaging firm, living in a decent one-bedroom apartment across town. My brother Derek was 32, newly married to his wife Pamela, living in a subdivision 40 minutes away with a mortgage that, I would later learn, was quietly strangling them. Derek called me the week after Dad's diagnosis. He was sorry, he said. He was devastated. He and Pamela had just taken on the house, and things were tight financially, and he wasn't sure how much he could do, but he would be there in spirit, absolutely, 100%. I remember standing at my kitchen window watching rain streak down the glass, and thinking that I already knew what that phone call meant. It meant I was going to do this alone. So I did. I negotiated my contracts to remote work. I moved my equipment into Dad's spare bedroom. I learned which medications to give at what time, and what the difference looked like between a bad day and a dangerous one. I learned how to adjust the workshop stool so he could still sit in there with me even when he couldn't stand, how to hold a conversation with someone whose words were starting to come slower and slower. I learned that grief has a particular texture when the person you're grieving is still sitting right next to you. Dad had moments of clarity that arrived like windows opening in a closed room. During those moments, we talked about everything: his life, the business, the house he had bought with 30 years of careful saving, the workshop that held his entire professional legacy, a collection of restored pieces worth more than most people imagined. We talked about Derek, and Dad's voice would go careful and flat in a way that told me everything without saying anything. He sees the property, Dad said to me once, not the people in it. I've known that about him since he was 15. I just kept hoping I was wrong. On those afternoons, I would set up my laptop at the kitchen table and he would sit across from me and he would dictate while I typed. Letters, instructions, not to me, necessarily, just into the record. His attorney, a man named Mr. Calloway, who had handled Dad's affairs since before I was born, came by the house 4 times in the last year of Dad's life. Each time, Derek called afterward to ask how it went. I always told him it was just routine. That was not entirely accurate. My father passed on a Thursday in late October. He was at home, which is what he wanted. I held his hand. Derek arrived 40 minutes after, with Pamela, and I remember watching them come through the door and seeing the way Pamela's eyes moved immediately to the workshop through the back window before they moved to my father's face. The next 3 weeks were the administrative machinery of loss, calls and paperwork and casseroles from neighbors, and the strange hollow feeling of a house that had always smelled alive going quiet. Derek was present for the public-facing parts, the visitation, the service, the reception. He shook hands and accepted condolences and said all the right things. Pamela was warm and well-dressed and managed the catering. When it came to the actual estate, he went very quiet. Mr. Calloway reached out to both of us within the week. There was a will, he said. There were some things to discuss. Derek pushed for a meeting at his house rather than Mr. Calloway's office, which I noted. He said it was more comfortable, more family-oriented. Mr. Calloway agreed with the neutrality I had learned to read over the years as professional patience. I arrived at Derek and Pamela's house on a Sunday afternoon in November. The subdivision always made me feel faintly uneasy. All the identical lawns and the Ring doorbell cameras and the 3-car garages. I sat at their dining room table with a cup of coffee I didn't touch and looked at my brother across from me. He looked like Dad around the eyes. He had never acted like him. Pamela was at the kitchen counter, close enough to hear everything, far enough to pretend she wasn't part of the conversation. She was wearing a cream blouse, and her hair was done. She had been preparing for this. "So," Derek started, folding his hands on the table, like he was about to explain something to a child. "I've been talking to a real estate attorney, not Mr. Calloway, someone with more transactional experience. And I think the cleanest path forward is to liquidate the estate. List the house, empty the workshop, sell the collection through an auction house, split the net proceeds." I waited. "Split how?" I said. 50-50, he said. "After expenses." I looked at him. "You mean after your attorney fees and the auction house commission and the carrying costs that you've already apparently started calculating?" He shifted in his chair. "There are also the debts to account for. Dad had some outstanding on the business line of credit. Dad's business line of credit had a zero balance. I had reconciled it myself 6 months before his death because he'd asked me to. I had the statements in a folder in my car. I didn't say that yet. I think we should hear what Mr. Calloway has to say," I said. Derek's jaw tightened slightly. "I've already spoken with Calloway. He's getting older, honestly, 70-something. He's not really equipped to handle something like this. I think we need someone with fresh eyes." "Right," I said. Pamela brought a plate of cookies to the table and set them down with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know this is so hard," she said. "For both of you, we just want to make sure everything gets handled efficiently." "Efficiently," I said. I picked up a cookie and held it. "Dad spent 30 years building that workshop. I spent 2 years keeping him alive long enough for it to still be there. I want to make sure the right person handles it." The silence that followed had a specific texture. Derek looked at Pamela. Pamela looked at the table. "Your time there was family," Derek said finally. "That's different from a financial contribution. You were living rent-free." "I was living in a spare bedroom," I said, "working remote contracts at reduced rates, managing his medications, driving him to appointments, cleaning the house, maintaining the workshop equipment so it wouldn't depreciate while he couldn't use it. I wasn't on vacation." "We're not dismissing what you did," Pamela said quickly. "It felt like it," I said. Derek leaned forward. "The point is that the estate belongs to both of us equally. We are both his children. And the most logical thing is to sell and split and move on. It's what Dad would have wanted. He wouldn't want us fighting over property." I looked at my brother then. At his face, which I had known my entire life and which was currently doing something I recognized from childhood. He was making the calm, reasonable expression that meant he had already made a decision and was waiting for me to accept it. "I hear you," I said. "Let me talk to Mr. Calloway." The drive home took 45 minutes. I called Mr. Calloway before I hit the highway. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting my call. He told Derek there was a will reading. "Right," I said. "He did," Mr. Calloway said. "And Derek pushed to do it without you present." There was a pause. "He suggested handling it informally within the family first." "Yes, Mr. Calloway," I said. "Did my father update his estate documents at any point in the last year?" There was a longer pause. "I think we should meet in person," he said. We met the following morning at his office, a firm on the east side of the city that had occupied the same building since 1987. He had a full head of white hair and a handshake that meant something. He closed the door, sat across from me, and placed a folder on the desk between us. "Your father made several amendments to his estate plan in the 18 months before he passed," Mr. Calloway said. "The most significant was 8 months ago. He removed the equal division clause and restructured the distribution." I kept my voice very steady. "How did he restructure it?" "The residential property and workshop go to you outright. The liquid assets in his savings accounts are split equally. The collection, which has been appraised at approximately $240,000, goes to you with the stipulation that you continue the restoration business for a minimum of 3 years or donate the pieces to institutions of your choice." I sat with that for a moment. Does Derek know? He knows there is a will. He does not know the contents. I was waiting to schedule the formal reading. He has been, Mr. Calloway said carefully, somewhat persistent in trying to move forward without one. I nodded. I looked at the folder. Is there anything else? Mr. Calloway opened the folder. Yes. And this is the part I need you to listen to carefully. 3 weeks before your father passed, my office received a power of attorney document. Standard form, naming your brother as sole agent for financial decisions. It had your father's signature. My stomach dropped. Dad signed a power of attorney for Derek. That is what the document claims, Mr. Calloway said. He slid a copy across the desk. But I had spoken with your father the week before this document arrived. He was clear-minded that day, actually quite sharp. He told me explicitly that he did not intend to give Derek financial power of attorney. He said he had concerns about what Derek might do with it. I looked at the signature. My father's name in blue ink, on the line at the bottom. I had watched my father sign his name hundreds of times across my life. Birthday cards and checks, and the backs of photographs. I had watched his signature change over the last 2 years, watched the familiar sharp angles soften and blur as his condition progressed. By the time this document was dated, he had been having significant tremor episodes. I had ordered him a special weighted pen in July because the regular ones were too hard for him to control. The signature on the page was clean, deliberate, practiced. I pulled out my phone and opened my photos, scrolling back through months of documentation I had kept out of sheer caregiving instinct. Medical appointment notes, medication logs, and photographs of the cards Dad had written during his last months, the ones he had labored over with shaking hands because he wanted them to be handwritten. I found one from August, his signature beneath a birthday message to my cousin. I placed my phone on the desk next to the power of attorney document. Mr. Calloway looked at both. He was quiet for a very long time. He didn't write that signature, I said. No, Mr. Calloway said. I don't believe he did. The next 4 days were the kind of quiet that happens before something loud. I went back to my apartment and I did what I had always done when something was too large and too painful to process directly. I worked. I pulled up old contract files. I reorganized my hard drive. I made tea I didn't drink. And I thought about Pamela. Because here is the thing about being the sibling who stayed. You pay attention in ways that other people don't know you're paying attention. I had watched Pamela at family dinners for 7 years. I had watched the way her eyes moved when money was mentioned. I had watched the way she managed Derek, the small corrections she made to his sentences in public, the way she steered conversations away from topics that might expose anything uncomfortable about their finances. I had watched her look at the workshop with an appraiser's calculation from the very first time she visited. Derek was not smart enough to have done this alone. Derek was impulsive and occasionally lazy and more interested in being seen as successful than in doing the work of becoming it. But Pamela was organized. Pamela made lists. Pamela had worked in real estate administration before she had children, and she understood documents and timelines and how estates moved. I called a handwriting analyst recommended by Mr. Calloway's office, Dr. Miriam Osei, who had been providing forensic document analysis for 30 years and who had, as she put it when I met her, absolutely no patience for people who thought forging a signature was either clever or difficult to detect. She examined the power of attorney document alongside my father's authentic signatures with a professional focus that I found deeply calming. The baseline tremor pattern is completely absent, she said without looking up. Your father had essential tremor in addition to his neurological condition. It produces a characteristic micro-oscillation in the downstrokes. This signature has none of it. It also has a pen lift in the middle of the R that your father never made. Whoever did this studied his signature, but didn't have enough authentic samples from this period of his illness. They used an older model. She printed her report, signed it, and handed it to me across her desk. I'll stand behind this in any proceeding you choose, she said. I drove home with the report on the passenger seat, and I thought about my father sitting in that workshop at the end of a long day, showing me how to identify the original finish on a piece of furniture underneath decades of badly applied lacquer. You have to look for what was there before, he said, not what someone put on top to cover it up. The formal will reading was scheduled for the following Thursday at Mr. Calloway's office. Derek had finally agreed to attend, though he had spent the preceding week sending me texts about the importance of not making this adversarial, and how Dad would have wanted them to work together, and how Pamela had done so much research on estate sales. Each message landed in my phone, and I read it and set the phone face down on my desk. On Wednesday evening, Derek called rather than texted. His voice had a forced lightness that I recognized as performance. "Hey," he said. "Just wanted to touch base before tomorrow. Make sure we're on the same page going in." "What page is that?" I said. He laughed a little. "Just, keeping it civil, keeping it clean. I know emotions are running high." "Emotions are fine," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow." There was a brief pause. He called me by name in a way that meant he was about to say something he had rehearsed. "I want you to know that whatever the will says, we can still approach this as a family. Calloway's old-fashioned. Wills can be contested. I'm not saying we go that route, but there's flexibility if we're both reasonable." "I understand," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow." I sat in the parking lot of Mr. Calloway's office building for 10 minutes before going inside. It was a gray December morning, the kind that sits on everything like a wet cloth. I had the folder on the seat beside me. I thought about my father in his workshop on winter mornings, the space heater going in the corner, a piece of furniture on the bench, his hands moving with that absolute certainty that people only develop through decades of practice. When I walked into the conference room, Derek and Pamela were already seated. Pamela had a legal pad. Derek had his phone face up on the table, and he was watching the door when I came in. He looked like a man who had done a calculation and felt confident about the answer. Mr. Calloway entered and shook hands with everyone and sat at the head of the table. He set 2 folders in front of him and folded his hands. He went through the standard opening language, the date of execution, the confirmation of mental competency at time of signing, the formal identification of beneficiaries. I watched Derek's face while Mr. Calloway read. For the first 3 minutes, it was fine. And then, Mr. Calloway reached the amended clause. Derek's expression didn't collapse all at once. It went in stages. First confusion, a small knitting of the brow, as the words reached him. Then something sharper, as the meaning resolved. Then he looked at me, and I watched him understand that I had already known. Pamela's face did something different. It went perfectly still. The legal pad in front of her stopped moving. The residential property, including the workshop at this address, Mr. Calloway continued reading, is bequeathed in its entirety to my daughter. The collection of restored antique furniture, currently inventoried and appraised, is bequeathed to my daughter under the following conditions. "This is wrong," Derek said. His voice was flat. Mr. Calloway finished the paragraph and looked up. "The document is legally executed, notarized, and filed," he said. "He updated this without telling me," Derek said. "He couldn't have. He wasn't in a condition to make decisions like this. He was entirely competent at the time of signing," Mr. Calloway said. "I can speak to that directly, as I was present." Derek looked at me again. "You talked him into this. Dad made this decision," I said. "I found out the details last week." "You were there for 2 years," Derek said, and his voice was getting louder. "You had constant access to him. You isolated him. You turned him against his own son. That is a serious allegation, Mr. Calloway said quietly. "She manipulated a sick man," Derek said. "I will contest this. I will get an attorney, and I will contest every word of it." "Before you do," I said, "I think you should hear about something else." I opened the folder and slid the handwriting report across the table. Then I slid the photograph of my father's authentic August signature beside it. Then the power of attorney document. Derek looked down at the papers. Pamela looked at the papers. Something passed between them across the table, fast and private, like a signal. I caught it. The power of attorney that arrived at Mr. Calloway's office 3 weeks before Dad passed, I said. The one with Dad's signature. Dr. Oze's report is on top. She's a forensic document analyst with 30 years of experience. The report is 12 pages, and the conclusion is on page 1, if you want to start there. The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight. Derek picked up the report. He turned to the first page and read for a moment. His face had gone pale. "This is," he started. "Your father's signature in that final period had distinct tremor characteristics," Mr. Calloway said. "The signature on that document does not. Dr. Osei has identified 7 specific points of divergence. She is prepared to testify to her findings." Derek set the report down. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at Pamela. Pamela was looking at the legal pad in front of her. "I didn't," Derek said. His voice had changed entirely. It was smaller. "I didn't know about this. I never asked anyone to, I never said to do anything like." "Pamela," I said. She looked up. "You knew about the amended will, didn't you? You figured it out, or you found a document, or Derek told you what Dad had said when he was upset one evening, and you knew that if the real will went through, we would lose the house and the workshop. So you handled it." Her expression shifted through something complicated and landed on cold. "I was protecting my family," she said, "by forging my father's signature on a legal document." I said. "We have children," she said, as if that were an explanation for anything. Derek was staring at her. "Pamela, we are drowning, Derek," she said. Her voice had dropped. Her composure was trying to rebuild itself. "We are 4 months behind on the mortgage. I have tried to tell you how serious it is, and you won't hear it, and someone had to do something." "You forged his signature," Derek said. "You told me the POA was legitimate. I told you we needed to move quickly. I said that Dad had signed it. I may have been unclear about exactly how it was obtained." The room was very still again. Mr. Calloway's pen was resting on his folder, and he was watching Pamela with the practiced neutrality of a man who had seen the interior of many family emergencies. Derek looked at the table for a long time. He looked at the report and at the photograph of Dad's signature and back at the report. Then he looked at me, and something passed across his face that I had not seen there in a very long time. It was shame, not the embarrassed kind, but the deep kind. "I'm sorry," he said. I looked at my brother. He looked like my father around the eyes. "I know," I said. Pamela reached across the table and put her hand on Derek's arm. He moved his arm away. I had not planned for that. I want to say that what followed was clean and swift and satisfying in the way that justice is supposed to look. It wasn't entirely. Derek retained his own attorney, not to contest the will, but to navigate his own situation, because the discovery of the forged document created complications for him personally, questions about what he had known and when. Mr. Calloway referred the forgery to the appropriate authorities. Pamela retained her own attorney the following week. By February, Derek and Pamela's mortgage was in formal foreclosure proceedings. The subdivision house, the cameras, the 3-car garage, it all went back to the bank. Derek moved into a rental. I don't know where Pamela went. I didn't see my brother for 2 months. Then, one afternoon in March, my phone rang. I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did. He sounded tired in a way I had never heard from him before. Not the performative exhaustion of a busy man, but the real kind. The hollow kind that comes from losing something you didn't know you had until it was gone. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it. For not being there when Dad was sick. For letting things get to where they got. I know I can't fix it." I sat with the phone against my ear and listened to my brother breathe on the other end of the line. "You could have been there," I said. "That was a choice." "I know. Dad didn't cut you out completely," I said. "The liquid savings were split 50-50. That was his call, not mine. Whatever you do with it." I heard him exhale. "Thank you," he said. "For that, I'm not doing it for you," I said. "I'm doing it because that's what Dad wanted." We hung up. I stood in the middle of the workshop for a while after that. The space heater was going in the corner. There was a Victorian side table on the bench that I had been working on for 3 weeks, stripping back 4 layers of paint to the original walnut underneath. My father's tools were arranged along the wall, in exactly the order he had left them. I thought about patience. The estate settled in April. Mr. Calloway walked me through the final paperwork in his office on a Tuesday morning, and I signed my name on the lines where he indicated, and it was done. The house was mine. The workshop was mine. The collection was mine, and the 3-year clause didn't feel like a condition. It felt like permission. I had a business license filed by the end of the month. I updated the workshop's website, which had been dormant for 2 years, and sent a single email to my father's former client list, explaining that the work would continue. I received 47 replies in the first week. 11 of them had pieces they wanted restored. I kept my freelance contracts running in the mornings and worked the bench in the afternoons. I was not my father. My hands didn't have his 30 years, but I had patience, which he had spent a lifetime teaching me. And I had the tools, and I had the space with its smell of sawdust and linseed oil, and some days when the light came through the windows at the right angle, and the heater was running, and I was working on something old and overlooked that was slowly becoming itself again. I could feel him in the room. I called Mr. Calloway one evening in May to check in about the final paperwork, and he told me, in passing, that a client he couldn't name had recently retained his firm to set up a basic estate plan, and that this person had specifically asked him to say hello to me. I put the phone down and looked at the workshop through the back window and understood that my father had probably known that too. That patience moves in long cycles. That some things take longer than you expect to restore. Not furniture, but people. That the original thing is still in there beneath whatever got layered on top. You just have to be willing to look for it. On the shelf above the workbench, I keep a photograph. It's from 6 years ago. My father and me at a flea market. Both of us crouched over a water-damaged walnut secretary desk that the seller was practically paying someone to take. My father's hand is on the surface, and he's looking at something I can't see in the photograph, but that I remember. He was showing me where the original finish was still intact in a corner the neglect hadn't reached. "See that," he said. "That's what it's supposed to look like. That's what we're working toward." I look at that photo on the mornings when it's hard, when the work feels slow, when I'm aware of everything that was lost to get to this place. And then I turn back to whatever is on the bench, and I pick up the right tool, and I go looking for the original thing underneath.